news, the New York Jets have their man. According to our Adam Schefter, Gang Green is hiring 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh.
The Atlanta Falcons have named Titans offensive coordinator Arthur Smith their 18th head coach in franchise history.
Yeah, the Chargers very stealth in the head coach search, and a lot of people were looking a lot of different directions. They were always looking at Brandon Staley, the defensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams. Meanwhile, the Detroit Lions today get to finalize what we have known for a couple days, that Dan Campbell, the Saints tight ends coach and assistant head coach, is going to be their next head coach.
In some breaking news as we start the show today. Just a couple of hours ago, the news came down that the Eagles are hiring Nick Ciriani as their new head coach.
And welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your favourite soap opera straight from the Great British Isles. Although the drama has dwindled somewhat on Kirby Drive this week, Cal's franchise and the running of the franchise remains in question. The feelings of the quarterback remain in question. But as of the news Thursday night, the Philadelphia Eagles have hired Nick Ciriani from the Indianapolis Colts, taking their offensive coordinator to be their new head coach in Philly. The Texans, despite firing O'Brien in early October after the Week 4 loss to the Minnesota Vikings, are the last to hire a head coach. The first team to hire a general manager. They were quick off the mark 3 days after the season. But the head coach and hire has taken some time. And it was just reflecting on some of those reasons as we sit here on Friday 22nd. And the question, I think, is Nick Caserio was said to have reset the timelines on this head coaching search. He had his own list. Forget about the Korn Ferry list. Arthur Smith was only on their list apparently, and that was very quickly wrapped up with the Atlanta Falcons. But the Falcons are a good example of they managed to in parallel coordinate a head coaching hire and the GM hire, bringing Terry Fontenot over from the Saints in unison. Whereas the Texans, just as it was with their turning the back on the process with Korn Ferry, again, it kind of seems clunky, because my question comes in of the timelines. The timelines were pretty clearly laid out that the deal for Caserio was agreed late Tuesday after the meeting. He signed that contract on Wednesday. They delayed the announcement to the Thursday due to the ongoing incident in Washington, D.C. with the resurrection and the attack on the Capitol building. They then hold the press conference on Friday. Now, all we know that they spoke to the coaching staff and sort of taken some internal interviews in that time. But beyond that, there's a time lag between the Friday and into the Saturday and the Sunday that you had all day Wednesday, or some of the day Wednesday into Thursday, and part of the day on Friday to contact head coaches. Now, there may have been, there may be, preconditions, speaking to agents, screening of these interviews before you can approach teams and notify the league of these interviews. But exemplify no more than Robert Saleh, who the Texans were the only opening not to interview him. He was then interviewed and very quickly hired after his second meeting with Joe Douglas. Again, a team that were coordinating only a head coaching hire, as if Joe Douglas was the carryover from the previous regime. But he was then a candidate the Texans had no opportunity to do. You could argue if there was a similar interest with Caserio, he missed on the opportunity to interview Arthur Smith. He did, to his credit, interview Brandon Staley, who then, after taking his first meeting in person, the Chargers moved very quickly to hire him, moves across the hallway in that building in California, and is now the next head coach of the Chargers. So another name came off the board pretty quickly. And I think, albeit Detroit did, again, an example of a team who managed to in parallel, make their head coach and general manager hire at the same time. They've probably done themselves a favour there, because I don't think the Texans would have ever been involved in Dan Quinn, and then Urban Meyer, I don't think was never an option for Houston, and Trent Baalke comes in as an already in-house name to be their GM, and I think obviously Urban is ruling the roost there. So the Texans were put behind the 8 ball undoubtedly by the intervention of Easterby's into the Korn Ferry process. There was a time lag in terms of getting interviews done and missing deadlines, and probably not being, certainly from our outside point of view, being quicker off the ball. There may be reasons for that, as we said. So it made me think of some hypotheticals. If we had have continued with the process, say the divine forces of Jack Easterby had not interfered in Cal's thinking, if the Texans right now were sitting with Omar Khan as the general manager, a guy who wasn't in really for any of the other openings, and Matt Eberflus, who's still on the market, knowing what we know now, were they necessarily the best hires? You could question. Not so, credit to some of the Texans which haven't had a lot. I mean, you could argue that they may not have been the best hire based on how the market has played out. But it made me think, would Deshaun Watson be as pissed as he is right now? Would his camp have umbrage and a real philosophical lack of alignment with the way in which this team's run? And a part of me thinks yes, because it would have shown a change and a clean slate and new leadership and a new way to do things. And I think the biggest thing we could probably take from that potential scenario is Jack Easterby would not be in this building right now. So you could argue on that alone we would be better off. But on paper, again, go back to that point, Caserio represents a real experienced individual. But as many media sources are pointing out, this is his first coaching hire that he's involved in, because obviously that was not a factor in his role in New England. So the transferable skills of signing agents, coaches is still the same, but there was a limited window there that feels like the Texans were standing holding on with something in hand, and the rest of the dominoes and the forces in the market have played out, and they look behind the rest of the teams. But there may be an element there that Deshaun and his camp do not have the same umbrage, and they do not have the same media scrutiny that they've had. And I think there is that scrutiny, but I think that's because the Deshaun narrative has allowed Athletes First and David Magaleta, or if it's ESPN with an axe to grind, they've shown Cal and his operation up for what they are essentially, and it's to be a two-bit, badly run billion-dollar organisation. Leadership and standards of organisation and operations that should not be possible at this level, and I think that's a big thing. And that's been, and look, we all knew that at a local level. The national level has now seen it for what it is. So there's almost an airing of that dirty laundry. That may well pay off in time, because it's not until a weakness or a flaw is exposed that it will necessarily be attacked or addressed. So there was a big wave of days of pain to go through if you're interested and follow this team. But that may pay off in the long run. But I think as well, we've got to remember, and I touched on this earlier in the week, but there is so much at play here, and so many forces and so many people with their nose out of joint and genuinely have a case for an axe to grind against the Houston Texans, that they have, and if you think of elections are swung, you've seen that with Cambridge Analytica, you've seen the use of social media, and it definitely feels like that there's certainly accounts out there getting a lot of attention for not really saying a huge amount. When you look into the detail of that, most of the accounts or the likes are hidden. And from taking from previous experience, whether it's a product you're pushing, whether it's something you want to be scrubbed off the internet, or whether you want to drive awareness to an issue, a news story, a movement, you can pay for that. And I think we probably need to not forget that you can pay for what you want if you've got deep enough pockets to happen online. And Joe Public, 9 times out of 10, through social media, swallow it like a lump of ice cream, no questions asked. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. But let's not forget or lose sight of the fact that you can manipulate people's content and what they see in their newsfeed, and therefore their opinion and outlook, very easily. And I think that's definitely been a part. So whoever's behind that probably won't come out in the open, but there's certainly some obvious people out there who've got an axe to grind. And a big thing that's actually been, at the forefront of that axe has been the leverage. Talking about Watson's leverage. And the more I thought about it, I think last week was that there is leverage on the side of Watson's camp because the Texans had people, as we said, with Tunsil, with Watson, who negotiated those contracts. They didn't get anything back. Negotiation is a trading of variables. What did Watson's camp trade back to us to get the position on cash flow, on number of years, on the no trade clause? It doesn't look like a lot. It's effectively, it was an ask, a barter, a give from Houston's side to give them that. And it was a mistake, I don't think about that. And I think it does suppress the trade value. It does impact things, but only further down the line. And the key milestone that we need to get past is if the Texans do accept to trade them. Like their star quarterback, which under any circumstance makes no sense. Whatever any other team is offering, it's not enough. But the leverage of the no trade clause only comes in at a point where you decide to trade Deshaun Watson. If you do not decide to trade him, the current architecture of this collective bargain agreement sits well and truly and firmly on the side of the club. The players gave up all their control and all their leverage this offseason by chasing that 1 or 2% extra that they got. And fair enough to them, it's a limited career. You need to get paid for the average 3.5 years you're in the league. But the Texans are well within a position to say, you've got two options here, Deshaun. You can either come and play for our new head coach, buckle up your chin strap, get in the field and practice with our guys that we've drafted and we've signed this offseason, or you sit for a year. Because at that point, beyond the current screaming and shouting through the media and social media, cryptic tweets, whatever you want to call it, there's not a lot Deshaun and his camp can do. And therefore I think, he's a guy who just loves football, wants to play, and I think ultimately, maybe even against the advice of his people and his backroom staff and all the guys that advise him, he'll come out and play because the Texans could just sit and hold, and nobody's in a better. If it comes down to a game of hardball, the Texans are best placed to play that game if that's the way it wants to work itself out. One final point of the Watson thing is I think he could have easily come out and spoke to somebody. Now they're on a pre-planned trip to New York. There's stuff at the diary. He's probably just going to go about his business in the off season and just look at it as media talk. But he could have deflated this at some point, and I think the Texans could have deflated this as well and just said, look, under no circumstances are we going to trade our franchise passer, because it makes absolutely no sense to do that. He's at the prime of his career, trying to trade him for picks and maybes and non-sure things against a known quantity, the most important missing piece that every franchise and every front office spends their careers, and some of them never find them. We have. So what would it make any sense for us to trade him? The answer is it wouldn't make any sense. So that's our position. The Texans haven't done that, so they've left themselves open to scrutiny, and Caserio may, once he's through this process of a head coach, play that out over time. I think as well, we are the last, but is being the last to hire a head coach necessarily the worst position? If you look at Cleveland with Stefanski and Berry came into the front office, if you think from where they took that club from this season to the position they were in this postseason, arguably the biggest jump in the league. So there's a lot to play out there, and it would seem, considering they could hire Eberflus today and all week, and he's not been hired, albeit they want to do a round of second interviews. So who and when they can bring in for second interviews in person will show us clearly and definitively who the front runners are. But certainly by all the reports, it's Eric Bieniemy or Leslie Frazier. Two guys who'll face off on either side of the sidelines directly. Defensive coordinator for the Bills, Frazier. Offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, and Bieniemy. They will face off this weekend. So depending on who loses that game, may get in, maybe the first person to interview for the position, may not be the last. Something interesting to watch. Will they bring any other candidates in for an interview? It doesn't seem like they will do, considering nobody's been interviewed since Monday. Bieniemy was the last, and credit Caserio again for lobbying for a rule change there. But certainly it feels like it's one of those two guys there, but I think all the negative media, the time lag that's taken, has a real impact to impact the coaching staff, as other teams like the Jets, who hired last Saturday, have now announced their entire offensive coaching staff. I saw that yesterday. Other teams are bringing in coordinators quite quickly. And look, I think it's a common practice that Leslie Frazier, Bieniemy, Eberflus, whoever it be, will speak to all their contacts, guys, and go, if I get this job, will you come and be this for me? So they'll have that in the wings, but that doesn't mean that it's a sure thing. That doesn't mean that they'll necessarily get those guys, because things can change, other jobs will come up and they might not want to wait. So it will impact the staff. But you saw again Andy Reid, impassioned speech about Bieniemy. You saw Alex Smith come out, cannot believe this guy's not had a head coaching gig. It's beyond me. Both of them said they understand, knowing the guy, how they can see potentially his best traits and his football nous might not get over in one of these calls. So they're over Zoom or an in-person interview. So certainly either of those guys would make a good jump in terms of head coach and bring a sure hand to the building. I think if you're going to go in momentum alone, in positivity, in terms of perception of the fan base and calming some of the storm, Bieniemy's the hire. And certainly he feels like a guy, much like Houston sports, being overlooked time and time again. And I think there'd be something quite acutely poetic to bring in a guy like Bieniemy and turn this franchise around. But as I said last week, it's going to be a job for the head coach and Caserio to go and approach their quarterback and calm some of these stormy waters that we're currently in, if we're going to try and make 21 season even to have a point to be even playing it at the minute. Because at the minute things look pretty bleak, but there needs to be this point of inflection where we hire the head coach and we start to look ahead to next season. This limbo period of pain and drawn out agony, I think it's been for many people, for the team, hopefully will be coming to an end into next week. But it may not. It may even be next week there's an agreement in principle and somebody doesn't sign until after the Super Bowl, depending on the preferred candidate and who makes it. But you've got to hope this thing will come and give itself a conclusion at some point soon. But thanks again for listening. You can check us out on podcasttexans.com, at podcasttexans, on Twitter and on Facebook.